If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. The Hope Hill slum in North Chicago woke with the first rays of sunlight. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the aroma of homemade bread as Nancy prepared breakfast for her only daughter, Emily, a 10-year-old girl who, despite the extreme poverty in which they lived, maintained a radiant smile on her face. "Emily, come have your breakfast before school," called Nancy, adjusting the makeshift table made of crates. Emily appeared in the small room that served as living room, kitchen, and bedroom for the two. She was paler than normal, and the large brown eyes that usually shone seemed dull that morning. "Mom, I'm in pain again," murmured the girl, holding the right side of her abdomen. It was the beginning of a journey of suffering. After weeks of visits to health clinics and long lines at the public hospital, the diagnosis came as a devastating blow. Emily suffered from a rare congenital liver disease that required urgent transplantation and specialized treatment available only in private clinics. The total cost exceeded $500,000, an astronomical amount for a house cleaner who could barely pay the rent for the shack where they lived. "What now, my God? How will I get that money?" lamented Nancy, sitting in the hospital waiting room with the medical report in her trembling hands. It was a hospital social worker, Maria, who suggested a fundraising campaign. "Let's publicize Emily's case on social media, make posters, ask NGOs for help. We can't give up," she encouraged, holding Nancy's calloused hands. In a few days, Emily's story began to circulate. Local newspapers published small notes. Volunteers distributed flyers, and an online fundraiser was created. Despite their efforts, after a month they had raised only 10% of the necessary amount. Meanwhile, time was running against Emily, who grew weaker each day. In the penthouse of a luxurious building in Lincoln Park, Robert Thompson flipped distractedly through the newspaper while drinking his espresso. At 45, he was one of the most successful businessmen in America, owner of the largest luxury hotel chain in North America. Born to a middle-class family in Oak Park, he built his empire from scratch and now enjoyed a life of comfort and privilege. Something caught his attention on that newspaper page, a small note about a girl from Hope Hill who urgently needed a liver transplant. Normally, Robert wouldn't dwell on stories like that. After all, tragedies happened every day, but something about Emily's gaze in the black and white photo touched him deeply. "Paul," he called his personal assistant, "find out more about this case. I want complete information by the end of the day." Paul completed the task efficiently, and that same night, Robert had in his hands a complete dossier on Emily and her mother. He learned about Nancy's daily struggle, the girl's dedication to her studies despite her illness, and the dreams she had of one day becoming a doctor to help children like her. Without hesitation, Robert made a decision that would forever change that family's life. The next morning, he went personally to Hope Hill, accompanied only by Paul. The arrival of a black Mercedes in that community caused a stir. Children ran around the car, curious, while adults watched suspiciously. Nancy was hanging clothes on the makeshift clothesline when she saw the elegant man approach her shack. For a moment she felt afraid. People like him didn't appear in the neighborhood without reason. "Are you Nancy Williams, Emily's mother?" he asked, with a surprisingly gentle voice. "And yes, that's me." "Did something happen?" she replied, apprehensive. "My name is Robert Thompson. I read about your daughter's case in the newspaper and would like to help." Inside the small shack, sitting uncomfortably on a wooden stool, Robert met Emily. The girl, despite the pain and weakness, received him with a shy smile. "Is it true you want to be a doctor?" he asked, impressed with the determination in the child's eyes. "Yes, sir, I want to cure sick people like me," she replied, with a maturity that didn't match her 10 years. At that moment, something changed inside Robert. Perhaps it was the simplicity of that dream, or the strength of a child who, even in the face of so much suffering, still thought about helping others. He, who had dedicated his life to accumulating wealth and power, felt small in the face of such purity. "Ms. Williams, I want to pay for all of Emily's treatment." Not as charity, but as an investment in the future of a brilliant doctor. Robert's words seemed unreal to Nancy, who fell to her knees, crying copiously. "My God, I can't believe it. You're an angel," she stammered between sobs. "I'm not an angel, Ms. Williams. I'm just someone who was lucky in life and can make a difference for your daughter." In the days that followed, Robert personally ensured that Emily was admitted to the best specialized clinic in Chicago. He hired the best doctors, arranged all the necessary tests, and made sure Nancy could stay by her daughter's side. Throughout the process, the transplant was a success, but the treatment would be long. Robert not only covered all medical expenses, but also bought a small apartment near the clinic, so mother and daughter could live with dignity. Additionally, he secured a scholarship at one of the best private schools in Chicago for when Emily recovered. During the recovery period, Robert visited the girl regularly. He brought books, puzzles, and mainly stories about doctors who had changed the world with their discoveries. Emily listened to him fascinated, absorbing every word, every possibility for the future. During one of these visits, Robert realized that his gesture had transcended simple charity. That child, with her determination and purity, had awakened feelings long dormant in him: compassion, empathy, purpose. "Emily," he said, holding the girl's small hand, "promise me you'll study hard to achieve your dream." "I promise, Uncle Robert. One day, I'll be the best doctor in America. And I'll help poor children like me who don't have money for treatment." Robert smiled, moved. "I'm sure you will, little one, and when that day comes, I'll be in the front row standing and applauding." What Robert didn't know was that promise made in a hospital bed by a 10-year-old girl would be the beginning of an extraordinary journey that, years later, would intertwine their destinies again in a surprising way. 18 years later, the Boston Medical Research Institute buzzed with anticipation for the grand event that would take place that night. The main hall had been transformed into an elegant space for the annual charity dinner, which would bring together the biggest names in American medicine and important business figures. The theme that year was Innovation and Accessibility in Healthcare, a subject that deeply touched Dr. Emily Williams. At 28, Emily had become one of the most promising researchers in hepatology in the country. Graduated with honors from Harvard Medical School, with a specialization in rare liver diseases, she dedicated her life to developing affordable treatments for patients who, like her in the past, couldn't afford the exorbitant costs of conventional therapies. "Nervous about today's speech?" asked her colleague Sarah, as they both finalized the last adjustments in the laboratory. "A little," confessed Emily, storing her notes, "but it's a unique opportunity to get support for our research. I can't waste it." The project, led by Emily, sought to develop an alternative treatment for a congenital liver disease, the same one that had almost cost her life in childhood. Her studies had advanced significantly in recent years, but the lack of funding threatened to halt progress. "Are you sure he'll be there?" asked Sarah while storing samples in the special refrigerator. "According to the guest list, yes. Robert Thompson confirmed his attendance," replied Emily, trying to hide her anxiety. "It's been almost 5 years since I've seen him in person." Despite the physical distance in recent years, Emily studying in Boston and Robert expanding his business internationally, they never completely lost contact. Birthday cards, occasional messages, and especially Robert's financial support throughout her academic training maintained the bond between them. However, with the growing responsibilities of both, personal meetings had become rare. Hours later, dressed in an elegant navy blue dress, Emily observed the crowded hall while waiting for her turn to go on stage. Important figures of American society circulated through the environment, champagne glasses in hand, talking about philanthropy and new investment opportunities. That's when she saw him. Robert Thompson, now 63, still maintained the elegant posture and keen gaze that characterized him, although his hair was completely gray and some wrinkles marked his face. Robert was talking with Dr. James Edwards, director of the Institute, when his gaze crossed with Emily's. An immediate smile lit up his face, and he excused himself to his interlocutor to approach her. "Em," he exclaimed, using the childhood nickname that no one else used. Or should I say, Dr. Williams now?" "For you, I'll always be just M," she replied, emotional, hugging him tightly. The hug lasted longer than conventional, as if both were trying to recover the years of distance in that simple gesture. When they moved apart, Emily noticed something she hadn't perceived from a distance. Robert seemed thinner than she remembered, and there was a subtle paleness to his skin. "Are you okay?" she asked, her medical instinct immediately alert. "Of course, just tired from traveling," he replied, briefly looking away. "But today isn't about me. It's your big day. I heard your project is revolutionizing the treatment of rare liver diseases." Before they could continue the conversation, the Master of Ceremonies announced the beginning of the presentations, and Emily was called to the stage. With confidence and passion, she presented her project, explaining how her alternative treatment could reduce the cost of conventional treatments by up to 70%, making them accessible to low-income people. "When I was 10 years old," she concluded, her voice choked with emotion, "I was saved by an act of generosity that changed my life. Today, as a doctor and researcher, I want to multiply that generosity, transforming it into science accessible to all, because I believe that health should not be a privilege but a right." The hall erupted in applause, and Emily discreetly sought Robert with her gaze. He was applauding, standing up with tears in his eyes, exactly as he had promised 18 years before. After the ceremony, during dinner, Emily was approached by various investors interested in her project. However, her attention was divided. Something in Robert's appearance worried her. During a moment of pause, she looked for him again and found him in a more secluded corner of the hall, breathing with difficulty. "Robert," she called, approaching quickly. "What's happening?" "It's nothing," he insisted, straightening up. "Just a passing discomfort." "Robert Thompson," she said, assuming her professional tone. "Don't try to fool a doctor. Something is wrong, and you're going to tell me right now what it is." Defeated, Robert sighed deeply. "I've been avoiding worrying you, Em. You already have so many responsibilities. But yes, I've been facing some health problems in recent months." "What kind of problems?" she insisted, analyzing him with a clinical eye. "A complex liver condition. Ironically, something not very different from what you faced in childhood, although the cause is different." Emily felt a knot in her throat. "Who is your doctor? What treatment are you doing?" "I'm under the care of Dr. Catherine Miller at the Vitalis Clinic. The treatment is experimental. It involves a medication recently approved by the FDA." The name of the Vitalis Clinic made Emily frown. She knew the reputation of that institution and its close relationship with the powerful pharmatech pharmaceutical industry, often questioned for its pricing practices and aggressive patent policies. "I want to see your tests," she stated, determined. "Tomorrow itself. I won't take no for an answer. You have your own work to worry about. Besides, Dr. Miller is one of the best specialists in the country. And I'm a specialist in rare liver diseases, Robert, and more importantly, I care about you more than any doctor ever will." The next day, in her private office at the Institute, Emily carefully examined the test results Robert had sent her. Each new page increased her concern. The picture was complex, a combination of genetic factors with damage caused by some external agent. "What exactly are you taking?" she asked, when Robert arrived for the improvised consultation. "A new medication called Hepatavit. It was launched by Pharmatech less than a year ago, specifically for cases like mine." Emily typed the name of the medication into her computer and analyzed the available information. Something in the data didn't seem consistent with the clinical picture presented by Robert. "I want to run some additional tests," she announced, "and I'd like to consult a colleague about your case if you'll allow." I trust you more than anyone else. Do whatever you think is necessary." Those words touched Emily deeply. The man who had saved her life years ago now placed his own survival in her hands. The irony of fate didn't escape her. It was as if life was offering her the chance to return the generosity she had received. "I'll take care of you, Robert, I promise," she said, firmly holding his hand. "It's my turn to keep a promise." What Emily didn't know was that, by taking on Robert's case, she was about to unravel a much more complex and dangerous plot than she could imagine. An investigation that would lead her to question not only Robert's treatment, but the entire American pharmaceutical system and the true origins of the fortune of the man who had changed her life. As Robert left the office, Emily picked up the key phone and dialed a number she rarely used. "Dr. Andrew Collins, this is Emily Williams. I need your help with a complex case." Harvard University Hospital was known for its silent corridors and the seriousness of its professionals. That Thursday morning, Emily anxiously waited in the cafeteria, stirring the spoon in her already cold coffee. Her thoughts were entirely focused on the results of Robert's new tests, which should be ready at any moment. The arrival of Andrew Collins interrupted her musings. At 45, the hepatologist doctor was an international reference in his field. With grey hair at the temples and penetrating green eyes, Andrew carried a presence that immediately inspired confidence. He had been Emily's professor during her specialization, and since then, they maintained a relationship of mutual respect that bordered on friendship. "Sorry for the delay, Em," he said, sitting across from her. "The meeting with the ethics committee extended longer than expected." "No problem," she replied, pushing a folder in his direction. "Thank you for agreeing to analyze this case with me." Andrew opened the folder and began to examine the documents carefully, his normally serene countenance transformed as he turned the pages. "Interesting," he murmured after a few minutes. "Very interesting." "What do you think?" asked Emily, leaning forward. Andrew removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Before answering, "There are inconsistencies here that don't make sense, Em. First, the hepatic markers are elevated in a very specific way, typical of drug toxicity. Second, the biopsy shows injury patterns that are not compatible with the diagnosed genetic condition." "That's exactly what I thought," confirmed Emily, feeling a mixture of relief at having her suspicion validated and concern for the implications. "And the medication he's taking." "Hepatovit," completed Andrew, nodding gravely. "I've heard of it. It's Pharmatech's newest miracle, approved in record time by the FDA despite questionable clinical data. Do you know anyone who participated in the tests?" "Not directly, but I have some contacts at the regulatory agency who could provide us with more detailed information about the approval process." Emily took a sip of her cold coffee, thoughtful. "Andrew, I need to tell you something about this patient. He's not just another case, he's Robert Thompson." Andrew's eyes widened with recognition of the name. "The businessman? The owner of Thompson Hospitality chain?" "Yes, and he's much more than that to me," she replied, briefly relating the story of how Robert had saved her life years ago. Andrew listened attentively, without interrupting. When Emily finished, he remained silent for a few moments, processing the information. "I understand your personal dedication now," he finally said, "but that makes it even more important that we are absolutely rigorous in our analysis. Feelings can cloud clinical judgment." "I completely agree. That's why I asked for your help." At that moment, Emily's cell phone vibrated. It was a message. From the laboratory, the results of the new tests were available. Both quickly headed to the nearest computer to access the system. What they saw confirmed their initial suspicions. The new tests, more specific, showed clear signs of drug-induced hepatotoxicity. Hepatovit, instead of curing Robert, was slowly poisoning his liver. "We need to get him off this treatment immediately," declared Emily, her voice trembling slightly. "I agree, but we need to be cautious," warned Andrew. "Pharmatech is not known for accepting criticism of its flagship product, and Dr. Miller, from what I know, has close ties to them." "I don't care about the consequences," affirmed Emily, determined. "I'm going to talk to Robert today." "Before that," interrupted Andrew, placing his hand on her arm, "we need to better understand what's happening. Something tells me there's more to this story than just a drug with serious side effects." In the afternoon, in Emily's office, Robert listened attentively as she explained her findings. His face, already pale, lost even more color. "You're telling me that the medicine that was supposed to cure me is making me sicker?" he asked, incredulous. "Exactly," confirmed Emily, "and we need to stop the treatment immediately." "But Dr. Miller insisted it was my only hope." "Robert," Emily held his hands. Trust me, there are other options. We'll develop an alternative treatment plan. I'm already in contact with Dr. Collins, one of the country's leading specialists. Robert nodded slowly. If you say so, I trust you. But Pharmatech won't like this at all. Something in the way he mentioned the company sparked Emily's curiosity. Do you have any connection with them besides being a patient? A heavy silence hung in the air before Robert answered. Yes, Em. Actually, I'm one of Pharmatech's main investors. I bought significant shares about 5 years ago when they expanded into the American market. This revelation caught Emily by surprise. Why did you never mention this before? Honestly, because it's just one investment among many others. I don't actively participate in management. I just receive quarterly reports on financial performance. Emily nodded, trying to process the information. I understand, but that makes it even more important to investigate thoroughly. If Hepatovit is causing damage to you, it's probably harming other patients too. Nike. The days that followed, Emily and Andrew immersed themselves in a thorough investigation of Hepatovit and Pharmatech. Through contacts at the FDA, they gained access to the original data from clinical trials that had led to the drug's approval. What they discovered was alarming. Look at this, pointed Andrew to the computer screen in his private office. The data was clearly manipulated. Cases of liver toxicity were classified as dropouts from the study, not as adverse reactions. And here, added Emily, analyzing another document, the control group was selected in a biased way. They included patients with more serious conditions to make Hepatovit appear more effective in comparison. The investigation led them even deeper, and they soon discovered that Pharmatech had quietly bought small research laboratories that had reported negative results about the drug, effectively preventing the publication of this data. This is criminal, murmured Emily, outraged. How many people are being harmed by this drug? The answer came a few days later, when an anonymous Pharmatech employee contacted Andrew, providing an internal report showing dozens of cases of liver failure in patients using Hepatovit, all carefully hidden from the public and regulatory agencies. With this information in hand, Emily decided to confront Robert again. He needed to know the extent of the problem and, as an investor, might be able to do something about it. I can't believe I was so blind, lamented Robert after hearing the findings. I invested in this company believing in its mission to develop innovative treatments, and now I discover they're profiting from people's suffering. The problem is even more serious, continued Emily, hesitant. We found evidence that Pharmatech is using part of the profits to bribe doctors and FDA officials. This explains the rapid approval of Hepatovit, despite contradictory evidence. Robert visibly paled. I need to tell you something that might change the way you see me. What is it? She asked, apprehensive. When I started building my hotel, Empire, I went through financial difficulties. I was saved by a substantial loan from an investor who later I discovered had connections to money laundering schemes. When I tried to distance myself, he introduced me to the founder of Pharmatech, claiming it would be a clean way to keep our businesses connected. Emily felt the air leave her lungs. The man she had admired all her life, the example of generosity and ethics that had guided her steps, was involved, even if indirectly, with corrupt practices. Why are you telling me this now? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Because you deserve to know the truth, and because if we're going to face Pharmatech, you need to understand what we're fighting against. They're not just greedy executives, Em. There are powerful interests behind this company. At that moment, seated before the man who had saved her life, Emily felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. It wasn't just about saving Robert. Now it was about exposing a corrupt system that placed profit above human life. We're going to need more help, she concluded, determined. And I know exactly who to call. As Emily left Robert's apartment, she didn't notice the dark car parked across the street, from which a man carefully observed her movements, phone in hand. She knows, said the observer to someone on the other. End of the line. The doctor discovered everything about Hepatovit. Take care of it, replied a female voice, cold and calculating. We cannot allow this to go public under no circumstances. The Boston sky dawned grey that Friday, as if reflecting the storm forming in Emily's life. Seated in her office at the Research Institute, she reviewed for the third time the documents she had gathered about Robert's case and Pharmatech. The evidence was irrefutable, but also extremely dangerous. The soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Andrew Collins entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. His serious countenance indicated that he also hadn't slept well. "Thought you might need this," he said, extending one of the cups. "Extra strong, as you like it." "Thank you," murmured Emily, accepting the coffee. "Did you manage to speak with your contact at the FDA?" Andrew sat across from her, running his hand through his grey hair in a gesture of concern. "Yes, and the news isn't good. According to him, Pharmatech is in advanced negotiations to expand its line of medications. Hepatavit is just the beginning." "This is a nightmare," sighed Emily. "We need to do something, Andrew. I can't simply watch while people are poisoned by a drug that should be saving them." "I completely agree," replied Andrew, leaning forward. "But we need to be strategic. Pharmatech has powerful connections, aggressive lawyers, and a lot of money to silence opposition." "And we have the truth," retorted Emily, with renewed determination. "Besides, now we have Robert on our side. He may not control the company, but as a significant investor, he has access to information that can help us." Andrew studied her for a moment, a shadow of concern crossing his face. "Do you really trust him, Em? Even after knowing about his questionable connections?" The question caught Emily by surprise. She had never really questioned her trust in Robert, even after the recent revelations. He had made mistakes, yes, but he had also saved her life, financed her education, supported her dreams. "I trust him," she finally answered. "Robert isn't perfect, but his heart is in the right place. And now, more than ever, he wants to do the right thing." Andrew nodded slowly. "In that case, we need to devise a plan. We can't simply denounce Pharmatech without solid evidence and adequate protection." "I've already thought about that," said Emily, opening a drawer and removing a flash drive. "Here are copies of all the documents we've managed to gather, including the internal reports your contact provided. I made 3 copies, one for you, one for me, and one that I sent to a trusted journalist with instructions to publish everything, if something happens to any of us." Andrew smiled, impressed with his former student's precaution. "Always several steps ahead, aren't you? But we need more than documents, Em. We need a plan to help Robert and all the other patients affected by hepatavit." At that moment, Emily's phone rang. It was Robert, his voice tense and hurried. "Em, I just received a call from Dr. Miller. She's insisting that I go to the clinic today for treatment adjustments. When I mentioned that I was considering other options, she became strangely insistent." "Don't go," Emily replied immediately. "Under no circumstances. Come to the Institute now. We need to talk in person." After hanging up, Emily explained the situation to Andrew. "This is no coincidence. Someone must have informed Dr. Miller about our investigations. Or about his decision to abandon the treatment," added Andrew. "Either way, this confirms our suspicions. They're monitoring Robert closely." An hour later, Robert arrived at the Institute. He looked more haggard than ever, his face marked by fatigue and worry. Emily quickly led him to her office where Andrew was waiting. "Robert, this is Dr. Andrew Collins, the specialist I mentioned," introduced Emily. The men exchanged a firm handshake, studying each other. "Dr. Collins, Em speaks very highly of you," said Robert. "I'm grateful for your help in this difficult time." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Thompson. I just regret the circumstances of our meeting." Seated around Emily's desk, the 3 discussed the situation in detail. Andrew explained his analysis of Robert's tests and presented an alternative treatment plan that could help reverse the damage caused by hepatavit. "The first step is a complete detoxification," he explained. "We need to eliminate all hepatavit from your system. Then we'll begin a liver regeneration protocol using a combination of conventional medications and complementary therapies." "And what about the chances of success?" asked Robert with a thread of hope in his voice. "Good if we act quickly," replied Andrew. "Your liver still shows good regeneration capacity despite the damage. With proper treatment and constant monitoring, I believe we can reverse much of the condition." Robert nodded, visibly relieved. And where would we do this treatment? Obviously, I can't return to the Vitalis clinic. We can use the university hospital facilities, suggested Emily. I have access to a research laboratory there, and Andrew can personally supervise your treatment. There's still another problem, intervened Andrew, his tone more serious. What do we do about Pharmatech and Hepatovit? There are other patients being treated with this drug, people who don't have the luck to count on doctors like Em. A heavy silence fell over the room as the three considered the implications of the question. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice loaded with determination. I'll use my position as an investor to demand a complete internal audit. It won't be easy, and I'll certainly face resistance, but it's a start. Meanwhile, added Emily, Andrew and I can prepare a detailed report on the adverse effects of Hepatovit and submit it to the FDA, requesting an urgent re-evaluation of the drug's approval. Andrew nodded, approving the plan. I can also mobilize some colleagues from the Medical Association. The more voices that join the chorus, the greater the chance we'll be heard. As they discussed the details of the plan, Emily couldn't help but notice how Andrew and Robert interacted, initially with caution, then with growing mutual respect. Two men from different worlds, united by a common goal, to save lives and expose the truth. It was night when they concluded the initial preparations. Andrew had to leave to attend an emergency at the hospital, leaving Emily and Robert alone. How are you really feeling? She asked, observing him with clinical eyes. Physically? Exhausted, nauseated, with constant pain, he admitted. But for the first time in months I feel hope, Em, thanks to you. I'm just returning what you did for me, she replied with a soft smile. No, said Robert, holding her hand firmly. What you're doing goes far beyond. It's not just about saving my life, but about correcting a terrible mistake. About doing the right thing even when it's difficult and dangerous. Robert's intense gaze made her look away, suddenly feeling vulnerable. I'm doing what any committed doctor would do. We both know that's not true, he replied gently. Most would prefer not to get involved, not to risk their career and reputation. You've always been special, Em, since childhood. The conversation was interrupted by Andrew's return, who brought with him a worried expression. We have a problem, he announced, closing the door behind him. I just received a call from my contact at the FDA. Pharmatech is aware of our investigation and has already begun to act. They're preparing a defamation lawsuit against any doctor who questions the safety of Hepatovit. That's pure intimidation, protested Emily, indignant. It's worse than that, continued Andrew. They're also pressuring the Institute's management to open an investigation into your unethical conduct, Em, alleging that you're using your position to denigrate an approved medication for personal reasons. Robert rose abruptly, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and guilt. This is my fault. They're using my connection to you to discredit your investigation. It's no one's fault, intervened Andrew firmly. It's just Pharmatech showing its claws. But this means we need to be even more careful from now on. Emily remained silent for a moment, absorbing the implications. Her career, for which she had fought so hard, was at risk. Everything she had built could crumble. But when she looked at Robert, at the man who had given her a second chance in life, she knew there was no real choice to make. I won't back down, she finally declared, her voice firm. If they want war, they'll have war. Andrew observed her with a mixture of admiration and concern. Something in his gaze had changed. It was no longer just the respect of a former professor for his talented student, but something deeper, more personal. You won't face this alone, Em, he said, his voice soft but determined. I'm with you until the end. Robert observed the interaction between the two doctors with interest. There was a tension there, an undercurrent that went beyond professional partnership. For a brief moment, he felt a pang of, would it be jealousy? The idea surprised him, but was quickly replaced by gratitude. Emily deserved to find someone who understood her, who shared her passions and values. The three of us together, agreed Robert, joining them. Pharmatech doesn't know who they're messing with. As they made the final adjustments to their plan, none of them noticed the shadow that briefly passed by the window of Emily's office, the silhouette of someone who carefully observed each movement, each word, each decision made in that room. The laboratories of the university hospital remained illuminated long after business hours. In the silence of the night, Emily and Andrew worked tirelessly, analyzing samples and comparing results. 2 weeks had passed since the beginning of Robert's alternative treatment, and the first signs were promising. His liver markers showed a slight improvement, although his general condition was still concerning. "Look at this," called Emily, pointing to the electron microscope screen. "The cells are beginning to show signs of regeneration." Andrew approached, his arm lightly brushing against hers as he leaned over to observe. Emily felt a slight shiver at the contact, something that had been happening frequently in recent weeks. The constant proximity, the long nights of work, the shared battles, all of this had created between them an intimacy that transcended the professional relationship. "Impressive," murmured Andrew, genuinely admired. "Your protocol is working better than we expected." "Our protocol," she corrected, smiling. "I couldn't have done it without you." Their gazes met for a moment longer than necessary, before Andrew looked away, turning his attention back to the results. "We still need to be cautious," he warned. "Liver regeneration is a slow process, and the damage caused by hepatovet was extensive." "I know that," agreed Emily, sighing, "but at least we're on the right track. Now we just need to—" The sound of her cell phone interrupted the sentence. It was a message from Robert. "We need to talk, urgent. Can I come to the lab now?" Emily frowned, concerned. "It's Robert. He wants to come here. Immediately." "Did something happen?" asked Andrew, equally apprehensive. "I don't know. I'll tell him we're waiting." Less than half an hour later, Robert entered the laboratory. Despite the evident paleness and fatigue, there was a renewed energy in his movements, an urgency that immediately alerted Emily. "I discovered something," he announced without preamble. "Something big about Pharmatech." Andrew quickly closed the laboratory door, ensuring they wouldn't be heard. "What is it?" "Remember I mentioned demanding an internal audit as an investor," began Robert, sitting on one of the high stools. "Well, they're fiercely resisting, as expected, but one of the financial directors, Michael Reed, secretly approached me. Apparently he's been trying to alert the board about irregularities for months without success." "What kind of irregularities?" asked Emily, feeling her heart accelerate. "Diversion of research results, bribery of FDA officials, fraudulent." "Clinical trials," enumerated Robert. "Basically everything we suspected, but there's more." Robert took a tablet from the inner pocket of his blazer and opened it on the laboratory counter. "Reed sent me these documents. They're records of financial transfers from Pharmatech to a shell company called Vita Innovations. This company, in turn, makes regular payments to various doctors throughout the country, including—" "Catherine Miller," completed Andrew, looking at the screen with a grave expression. "Exactly," confirmed Robert. "Your doctor is one of the main beneficiaries of this scheme. She receives bonuses for each patient she puts on the hepatovet protocol." Emily felt a wave of nausea. "That's completely unethical. She's literally selling her patient's health." "There's more," continued Robert, sliding to the next page. "I discovered that Pharmatech was aware of the toxic effects of hepatovet since the first clinical trials. They not only ignored the data, but actively suppressed negative reports. And the worst, they're preparing to launch an improved version of the drug, essentially the same product with a slightly modified formulation to circumvent legal issues." Andrew ran his hand through his hair, visibly disturbed. "This goes beyond mere negligence. It's deliberate criminal conduct." "We need to take this to the authorities," declared Emily, resolute. "It's not that simple," warned Robert. "Pharmatech has connections at all levels of government. Besides, Reed warned me that they're actively monitoring you too. Your phones, emails, perhaps even this laboratory." As if to confirm his words, the three simultaneously noticed a red light, blinking discreetly under one of the counters, a surveillance camera that certainly wasn't part of the regular laboratory equipment. Andrew reacted quickly, turning off the computers and making a gesture for them to continue the conversation normally while he wrote on a paper, "Let's go to my apartment. Safe." The three left the laboratory feigning normality, but with accelerated hearts from the discovery of the surveillance. In Andrew's car, the tension was palpable, as he drove through the night streets of Boston, occasionally checking the rearview mirror to ensure they weren't being followed. Andrew's apartment in Cambridge was spacious and surprisingly cozy, with shelves full of books and a balcony that offered a partial view of the Boston skyline. Away from the eyes and ears of pharmatech, they could finally speak freely. "This explains how they always seem to be one step ahead of us," commented Emily, accepting the cup of tea that Andrew offered her. "They've been monitoring us for weeks." "Which means we should act quickly," added Andrew. "If they've bugged the laboratory, they already know we have this information." Robert nodded gravely. "Reed warned me that he's at risk. He plans to leave the country next week, after gathering more evidence. He believes that the president of Pharmatech, Helen Thompson, is personally supervising this entire operation." The name made Emily freeze. "Helen Thompson? It can't be a coincidence." "It's not," confirmed Robert, with a heavy sigh. "Helen is my ex-wife." The revelation fell like a bomb in the apartment. Andrew and Emily exchanged surprised looks while Robert continued, visibly uncomfortable. "We divorced 8 years ago, after a tumultuous 5-year marriage. Helen was always brilliant and ambitious, qualities I initially admired. It was during our marriage that I began to expand my investments beyond the hotel sector, including pharmaceuticals, under her influence." "You never mentioned you were married," commented Emily, still processing the information. "It's not something I'm proud of," admitted Robert. "Our relationship became extremely toxic. Helen was obsessed with power and success at any cost, while I guess I never completely overcame my guilt about the questionable origins of part of my fortune." "And now she's using Hepatovit to get at you?" asked Andrew, connecting the dots. "I believe so," replied Robert. "When I divorced Helen, I withdrew much of my investment from her projects, which significantly delayed Pharmatech's expansion. She never forgave me for that. The fact that I was diagnosed with a liver condition and referred for treatment with Hepatovit, well, it's unlikely to be a coincidence." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you suggesting that she deliberately had you treated with a drug she knew to be toxic?" Robert just nodded, words unnecessary in the face of the terrible implication. A heavy silence fell over the apartment as the three absorbed the magnitude of the situation. They weren't just facing an unethical corporation, but a meticulously planned personal revenge. "This changes everything," Andrew finally said, his voice firm. "We need to be extremely careful from now on. Helen clearly has no ethical limits." "I agree," said Emily, standing up and walking to the window. The city shone below, millions of lights representing lives that could be affected by their next decisions. "But it also means we have a personal motive we can exploit. Helen is emotionally involved in this, which makes her vulnerable to mistakes." Robert observed Emily with a mixture of admiration and concern. "I don't want you to put yourself in danger because of me, Em. You've already done more than enough." "I'm not doing this just for you," she replied, turning to face him. "I'm doing it for what's right, for the dozens, perhaps hundreds of patients who are being poisoned by that drug, for the oath I took as a doctor." Andrew approached, placing a protective hand on Emily's shoulder. "We won't give up now, but we need a plan that keeps us safe while exposing the truth." In the following hours, the three outlined a meticulous strategy. They would use the documents provided by Reed, combined with the results of Emily and Andrew's research, to build an irrefutable case. Instead of going directly to the authorities, who might be compromised, they decided to present the evidence simultaneously to the press, international medical associations, and foreign regulatory agencies. "Helen has influence in America, but she can't control regulators in Europe or Asia," explained Robert. "Once international agencies start questioning Hepatovit, the FDA will have no choice but to act." As they worked on the details, Emily noticed how Andrew remained constantly close, offering silent support, his gaze frequently meeting hers. "Von Mai." A moment when Robert went out to take a call on the balcony, Andrew finally spoke about what was evidently on his mind. "Em," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I know this isn't the ideal moment, but I need to say something." Emily felt her heart accelerate. What is it? These last weeks working side by side with you, they've changed something in me, he confessed. I always admired your intelligence and dedication as a professional, but now I see much more. Your courage, your integrity, your heart. Emily was momentarily speechless, surprised not by the revelation itself. She had felt the growing tension between them, but by its direct sincerity. Andrew, You don't need to say anything now, he gently interrupted. I know we're in the middle of a battle, and that your history with Robert is complicated. I just wanted you to know how I feel in case things get out of our control. Before Emily could respond, Robert returned, his face pale and tense. I just received a call from Reed, he announced, his voice trembling. Helen discovered that he leaked information. He's fleeing right now, but before hanging up, he told me something disturbing. Helen is planning a major public demonstration of the success of Hepatavit tomorrow. She's going to present supposedly cured patients at a press conference. Manipulated or paid patients, probably, commented Andrew. Indignant. Worse, continued Robert. Reed believes she's going to announce the international approval of the drug, using falsified documents to impress foreign investors. Emily felt the weight of urgency on her shoulders. They no longer had the luxury of time for a meticulous plan. They needed to act immediately. Then we'll go for direct confrontation, she declared, with a determination that surprised even herself. Tomorrow at the press conference, we're going to expose Helen and Pharmatech in front of everyone. The look that Andrew and Robert exchanged contained both admiration and fear. The final battle was approaching, and none of them could predict its outcome. Wednesday morning dawned with an impeccably blue sky over Boston, dramatically contrasting with the emotional storm that agitated Emily. In front of the mirror in her apartment, she adjusted the navy blue blazer she had carefully chosen for the occasion. She wanted to look professional and confident for the confrontation that was approaching. Her phone vibrated with a message from Andrew. I'm arriving in 15 minutes. Ready? How to answer that question? She was about to face one of the most powerful pharmaceutical companies in the country, risking her career, reputation, and possibly her safety. And there was still that unfinished conversation with Andrew the night before, that declaration that had hung in the air between them without response. As ready as possible, she finally replied, opting for honesty. The doorbell rang punctually 15 minutes later. Andrew was impeccable in his dark grey suit, but the deep dark circles revealed a poorly slept night. In silence, he handed Emily a folder. I copied all the documents that Robert provided us, plus our reports on his treatment. I also included anonymous testimonies from 3 other patients I identified with similar symptoms after using Hepatavit. Emily nodded, quickly flipping through the material. This will be enough to, at minimum, raise serious doubts publicly. Where is Robert? He'll meet us directly at the Excelsior Hotel, where the press conference will be. He isn't well this morning. The concern in Andrew's voice made Emily look up from the documents. What happened? High fever during the night. I wanted to take him to the hospital, but he insisted he's well enough to attend. He's determined to face Helen personally. Emily bit her lip, apprehensive. Robert's health was too fragile for this kind of stress, but she knew well that stubborn determination, the same that had led him to help an unknown girl from the slums 18 years ago. In the taxi on the way to the hotel, the silence between Emily and Andrew was loaded with unresolved tension. Finally, as they passed through Central Park, she found the courage to address the pending issue. About last night, Andrew, what you said. He gently raised his hand, interrupting her. This isn't the moment, Em. We need to be completely focused on what we're going to face. After all this is over, we'll have time for personal conversations. She nodded, grateful for his understanding, although a part of her wished to clarify her own confused feelings. The growing attraction to Andrew mixed with the deep gratitude and affection she felt for Robert. The Excelsior Hotel, one of the most luxurious in Boston, was buzzing with activity when they arrived. Pharmatech's press conference had attracted journalists from all over the country and some international correspondents. Security guards in dark suits with earpieces discreetly patrolled the lobby. "Impressive," murmured Andrew. Helen certainly didn't skimp on this spectacle. Robert was waiting for them in a discreet corner of the lobby, visibly haggard but determined. Seeing them, he tried to sketch a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice weaker than usual. "The question is whether you are," replied Emily, concerned about his feverish appearance. "Robert, you should be resting." "I'll rest when Helen is exposed," he retorted, with a firmness that surprised them both. "I need to be present when the truth comes out. I owe this to all the patients who suffered because of Hepatovit." Together, they headed to the hall where the press conference would take place. The environment was meticulously prepared. A stage with the Pharmatech logo in the background, rows of chairs for the press, and a side table with cocktails and canapes for the guests. Emily noticed a group of well-dressed people wearing discreet gold pins, probably foreign investors, the real target audience of the event. They sat in the last row, trying to maintain a low profile while studying the environment. Emily recognized Dr. Catherine Miller among the executives on the stage, animatedly talking with a group of men in expensive suits. "That's Helen," whispered Robert, discreetly indicating an elegant woman who had just entered through a side door. Helen Thompson was impressive. Tall, with black hair impeccably arranged in a severe bun, she wore a red suit that emanated power and confidence. Her face, despite the evident aesthetic procedures, preserved a cold and calculating beauty, accentuated by keen eyes that seemed to analyze every detail of the hall. "I can see why you married her," commented Andrew quietly. "And also why you divorced." Robert gave a sad half-smile. "Helen was always fascinating. She was also always dangerous." As if feeling the gazes, Helen suddenly turned in their direction. Her eyes met Robert's, and for a moment an expression of genuine surprise crossed her face, quickly replaced by a predatory smile. She said something to one of the security guards, who immediately looked in their direction. "She saw us," alerted Emily. "We need to act before they stop us." At that moment, the hall lights dimmed and a presenter took the stage, announcing the beginning of the press conference. Helen Thompson was introduced as a visionary of the American pharmaceutical industry and pioneer in innovative treatments for liver diseases. Polite applause filled the environment as she took her place at the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, esteemed investors and partners," began Helen, her melodious voice carrying a slightly affected European accent. "It is with immense pride that Pharmatech today announces a historic milestone in American medicine. Our revolutionary drug, Hepatovit, has just received preliminary approval from European regulatory agencies, confirming what we already knew. We are at the forefront of treatment for complex liver diseases." Impressed murmurs ran through the audience, especially among foreign investors. Emily felt her blood boil at the blatant lie. She knew from Andrew's contacts that no European approval had been granted. Helen continued, detailing the supposed miraculous properties of Hepatovit, while screens displayed impressive but clearly manipulated graphics. Then, with a theatrical flourish, she gestured to the side of the stage. "But you don't need to believe just me or our data. Meet some of the patients whose lives were transformed by Hepatovit." 5 people took the stage, appearing healthy and vital. A lady of approximately 70 years took the microphone, relating how she was on the verge of the end before Hepatovit and now felt like a 40-year-old. Similar stories followed, each more miraculous than the previous. "It's time," whispered Andrew, before they finished with the rehearsed testimonials. Emily took a deep breath, gathering all her courage, and stood up. "Excuse me," she called in a loud and clear voice. "I have a question for Dr. Thompson." A surprised silence fell over the hall. All heads turned in her direction, including Helen's, whose eyes dangerously narrowed. "Certainly," replied Helen, her smile not reaching her eyes, "although we normally reserve questions for the end of the presentation." "And you are?" "Dr. Emily Williams, hepatology specialist from the Boston Medical Research Institute," replied Emily, advancing through the central corridor toward the stage. Andrew and Robert followed her closely. I'd like to know if Pharmatech intends to comment on the growing reports of acute liver failure in patients treated with Hepatovit, or on the suppressed data from your own clinical trials that demonstrate significant toxicity. An agitated murmur ran through the audience. Journalists immediately began taking notes, while Helen maintained a frozen smile on her face. "I don't know where you obtained this clearly mistaken information, Dr. Williams," replied Helen coldly. "Hepatovit underwent rigorous safety tests and manipulated tests," interrupted Andrew, joining Emily. "Dr. Andrew Collins, University Hospital. We have evidence that Pharmatech deliberately concealed data on serious adverse reactions and bribed FDA officials to accelerate approval." The murmur increased. Security guards began to move toward them, but were temporarily blocked by the agglomeration of journalists who now surrounded Emily and Andrew, eager for controversy. It was then that Robert approached the stage, his face pale but determined. "Helen," he called, his voice weak but audible in the still open microphone. Helen Thompson visibly paled upon seeing her ex-husband before everyone. "Robert, what an unpleasant surprise. Security, please, remove these intruders." "Before they remove me," continued Robert, "I'd like you to explain to those present why I, one of Pharmatech's main investors and your ex-husband, am suffering from progressive liver failure after 6 months of treatment with Hepatovit. Was it coincidence, Helen, or part of your revenge plan?" The hall exploded into chaos. Flashes fired in all directions. Journalists shouted questions. Investors murmured with concern. On stage, Helen seemed momentarily disconcerted before recovering. Her composure. "Robert always had a peculiar sense of humor," she tried with a forced laugh. "Clearly, he's confused due to his condition. In fact, he isn't even officially a Pharmatech patient." "Not officially, perhaps," intervened Emily, opening the document folder. "But we have here records from the Vitalis clinic showing that Robert Thompson was personally selected for the Hepatovit protocol by your direct order, Dr. Thompson. And even more interesting, we have financial records showing substantial payments from Pharmatech to doctors who prescribe Hepatovit, including Dr. Catherine Miller." The mentioned doctor, who until then had been observing the scene with growing horror, abruptly stood up. "This is defamation. I'll sue all of you for—" "Please, Dr. Miller," interrupted Andrew, with false courtesy. "We have copies of the bank transfers. I know your account in the Cayman Islands seems discreet, but not as much as you imagined." The security guards finally managed to make their way to them, but it was too late. The press was in a frenzy, and several investors were already discreetly leaving the hall, tensely talking on the phone. Helen, realizing she was losing control of the situation, made one last desperate effort. "This is clearly an orchestrated attempt at corporate sabotage. Robert Thompson is bitter about our divorce and now uses these charlatans to attack my company. They haven't presented a single concrete piece of evidence." "Actually," replied Emily, loud enough to be heard over the tumult, "we've already sent all the documentation to the FDA, Department of Justice, European Medicines Agency, and others, including Helen, your personal emails ordering the suppression of negative data about Hepatovit. Your financial director, Michael Reed, was very generous in sharing information before leaving the country." Helen's face transformed into a mask of fury. "You don't know who you're messing with, girl. When I'm done with you, you won't be able to get a job even as a nurse in a peripheral health post." "It's over, Helen," declared Robert, approaching. "More. The empire you built with lies is crumbling." It was at this moment that Robert staggered, suddenly pale as paper. His legs gave way, and he would have fallen if Emily and Andrew hadn't quickly supported him. "Robert!" exclaimed Emily, her medical instinct immediately overriding everything else. "Andrew, he's in shock. We need an ambulance now." While Andrew quickly checked Robert's vital signs, Emily looked at the stage one last time. Helen Thompson was observing the scene with an expression impossible to decipher, a disturbing mixture of satisfaction, anger, and, surprisingly, something that seemed almost like remorse. Amid the chaos of the imploded press conference, with journalists still shouting questions and security trying to control the situation, Emily could only focus on one thing: the unconscious man in her arms, the man who had saved her life and who was now fighting for his own. "Hang in there, Robert," she whispered, as ambulance sirens began to sound in the distance. "I won't let you go now. Not when we're so close." Andrew firmly held her hand, his eyes conveying a silent promise that together they would do the impossible to save Robert. As the medical team finally arrived and took over care, Emily felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The battle against Pharmatech was won, but the fight for Robert's life was just beginning, and it would be the most important she had ever faced. The antiseptic corridors of University Hospital had become the center of Emily's universe in the last 72 hours. Since Robert had been rushed from the press conference, she had practically not left the place, dividing her time between the laboratory, where she worked tirelessly with Andrew on a more aggressive treatment, and the ICU room, where she monitored every fluctuation in Robert's vital signs. The collapse during the confrontation with Helen had been just the beginning. In the following hours, the situation drastically worsened. Robert's liver, already severely compromised by hepatocyte, went into acute failure. The intensive care doctors gave Emily the prognosis she most feared. Without a liver transplant, in a few days Robert would not survive. "Any news from the transplant center?" asked Andrew, entering the laboratory where Emily was analyzing samples. She shook her head negatively, without raising her eyes from the microscope. "Robert is on the maximum priority list, but his blood type is rare, and compatibility is essential." In this case, Andrew observed Emily for a moment, the disheveled hair, deep dark circles, the almost feverish determination with which she worked. He gently approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You need to rest, Em. You won't help Robert if you get sick too." Only then did she raise her eyes, revealing an exhausted but obstinate look. "I can't stop now, Andrew. I'm so close. This experimental treatment can at least stabilize him until a compatible donor is found." The protocol Emily was developing was risky, combining elements of her own research with experimental techniques she had studied during her doctorate. It wasn't a cure, but it could gain precious time, days or even weeks. Andrew nodded, respecting her determination. "I have some news that might interest you. The FDA finally acted. Hepatocyte has been officially suspended throughout the country, and Pharmatech is under formal investigation." A brief smile crossed Emily's tired face. "And Helen? She tried to flee the country last night. She was detained at Logan Airport with tickets to the Cayman Islands." The news brought a bittersweet satisfaction. Justice was being done, but at what price? Robert remained between life and uncertainty, a victim of his ex-wife's greed and revenge. "There's one more thing," continued Andrew, hesitant. "Helen is asking to see Robert. She said she has crucial information about hepatocyte that could help with the treatment." Emily stiffened, instantly suspicious. "Probably another manipulation. How can we trust her after everything?" "I agree, but what if she really does know something that could help? We can't dismiss any possibility at this point." After long deliberation, Emily agreed to a supervised meeting. Helen arrived at the hospital under police escort, looking very different from the powerful executive at the press conference. Without makeup, with simple clothes provided by detention, she seemed smaller, more vulnerable, almost human. In the corridor outside Robert's room, Emily confronted her with professional coldness. "You have 5 minutes. A guard and I will be present the entire time." Helen nodded, surprisingly docile. Inside the room, the sight of Robert unconscious, connected to multiple machines, seemed to affect her deeply. For a moment, Emily glimpsed something unexpected in the woman's face, genuine remorse. "I never wanted it to come to this point," murmured Helen, approaching the bed. "I wanted to hurt him, yes, but not like this." "Why are you here?" asked Emily directly. "What information can help us?" Helen turned to face her, studying her with renewed interest. "So you're the famous M, the girl he saved." "Robert talked about you constantly during our marriage, his pride, his hope for the future. I was even jealous, of a child." "I didn't come here for reminiscences," cut Emily. "If you have something useful to say it now." Helen sighed deeply. "Hepatocyte has an antidote. We developed it simultaneously, as a precaution for cases of overdose in clinical trials. It was never officially registered. It would be admitting the toxicity of the drug. Emily felt a flash of hope mixed with fury. You knew about the risks all along and still put the drug on the market? Business is business, replied Helen, although without the usual conviction. But I never intended for Robert. She paused, visibly disturbed. The formula for the antidote is on a protected server at Pharmatech headquarters. I can provide the access codes. In the following hours, a coordinated operation between federal police, FDA, and the hospital team managed to recover the formula and quickly begin production of the antidote in university laboratories. Time, however, continued to be the greatest enemy. Even with the antidote, the damage to Robert's liver could be irreversible. While the first dose was being prepared, Emily remained at Robert's side, holding his inert hand, silently reliving the 18 years that united them. The complete cycle of how he had saved her, and now she was fighting to save him, seemed almost mystical in its symmetry. Dr. Williams. Emily raised her eyes to find the head nurse at the door, her expression graved in the transplant center called. There are no compatible donors on the near horizon. The news, although expected, was devastating. Emily nodded mechanically, thanking the nurse. When she was alone with Robert again, she allowed herself a moment of despair, silent tears running down her exhausted face. It was then that Andrew entered, finding her in that vulnerable state. Without words, he simply hugged her, offering the comfort of his solid presence. Emily allowed herself to collapse in his arms, releasing days of accumulated tension. The antidote is ready, he informed her softly when she calmed down. The team is already on the way to administer it. It won't be enough, murmured Emily. Without a transplant. Andrew moved away slightly, looking into her eyes with intensity. I have something important to discuss with you, Em. Something that could change everything. In the privacy of an empty conference room, Andrew exposed his idea, an experimental approach he had researched for years, involving partial liver transplantation from a living donor, combined with an innovative technique of accelerated cellular regeneration. The procedure has never been performed in the United States, he explained, showing diagrams and scientific articles. It's risky, controversial, and we would need special approval from the ethics committee. But it could work. And the donor? Asked Emily, quickly absorbing the technical details. Even with partial donation, compatibility is crucial. Andrew hesitated briefly. I've already checked the medical records. I am compatible with Robert. The revelation left Emily momentarily speechless. You would offer yourself as a donor? Yes, he answered simply. The risk to me is acceptable, considering what's at stake. Andrew, I can't ask this of you. It's a huge sacrifice, major surgery, months of recovery. You didn't ask, he gently interrupted. I'm offering. For Robert, for you, and because it's the right thing to do. Andrew's proposal triggered a frantic race against time, while Helen's antidote worked to neutralize the toxic effects of Hepatavit. Emily and Andrew presented the experimental protocol to the hospital's ethics committee, which convened an emergency meeting. The approval came with strict conditions, but it came, a chance, albeit risky, to save Robert. Preparations. For the surgery began immediately, with Emily supervising every detail, her experience in liver regeneration research being crucial for the pioneering procedure. On the eve of the surgery, Emily found a moment of quietude beside Robert's bed. The antidote had stabilized his condition enough for him to be removed from deep sedation, although he remained too debilitated for more than brief moments of consciousness. Em, he murmured, recognizing her through half-closed eyes. What happened? Rest, she replied, holding his hand. You're in the hospital. Helen has been detained, Pharmatech is being investigated, and Hepatavit has been suspended. A weak smile crossed Robert's pale face. We did it, then? Yes, she confirmed, swallowing the lump in her throat. Tomorrow you'll undergo surgery. Andrew will be your donor. Robert seemed to process the information slowly. Andrew? Why? Because he's an extraordinary man, replied Emily, with simplicity and emotion. Just like you. Robert studied her face for a long moment. For you love him, he finally said, not as a question but as a statement. The declaration caught Emily by surprise, not because of Robert's perception, but because, until that moment, she herself hadn't formulated her feelings so clearly. Feelings that had grown during weeks of working side by side, of shared struggle, of mutual trust. Yes, she finally admitted, both to Robert and to herself. I didn't realize until now. Robert weakly squeezed her hand. He's worthy of you, Em, and you deserve to be happy. The double surgery lasted 14 exhausting hours. Separate teams worked simultaneously, one removing part of Andrew's liver, another preparing Robert, and applying Emily's experimental protocol. Yet the center of it all was she, moving between the rooms, supervising each critical step, her unique knowledge connecting the ends of the revolutionary procedure. When it finally ended, Emily was beyond exhaustion, but the procedure had been technically successful. Now everything depended on the recovery of the two patients, if Robert's body would accept the new tissue, if Andrew's liver would regenerate properly. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. Andrew recovered quickly, his previous excellent health favoring regeneration. Robert, however, faced initial complications, partial rejection, hospital infection, moments of crisis that required emergency interventions. It was during one of these crises, a week after the surgery, that Emily lived her most desperate moment. Robert's vital signs suddenly plummeted, and for 3 terrible minutes, his heart stopped beating. The resuscitation team worked frantically, while Emily watched helpless as the man who had shaped her destiny fought for his own life. When finally the heart rhythm stabilized, Emily found herself alone in the hospital chapel, a place she rarely entered. It wasn't exactly a prayer she offered there, but a silent commitment. If Robert survived, she would dedicate her career not just to research, but to making advanced treatments accessible to all, regardless of their financial condition. It was as if the universe had heard her vow. The next morning, Robert showed the first unequivocal signs of improvement. His liver markers began to normalize, the fever subsided, and his consciousness returned more consistently. The transplanted tissue had begun to function fully, and Emily's experimental protocol showed results beyond expectations. The damaged liver showed signs of accelerated regeneration. 3 weeks after the surgery, Robert was sufficiently recovered to be transferred to a regular room. Andrew, already being discharged, made a point of visiting his donor recipient, creating a scene that moved the medical team, the two men, one saving the other, united by a literal and metaphorical bond. Seems like we're connected forever. Now, joked Robert, still weak but visibly better. You have part of me, I have part of you. Consider it my thank you gift, replied Andrew, smiling, for having saved him all those years ago. If it weren't for you, we would never have met. Emily observed the interaction with her heart overflowing with emotion. The complete cycle, the perfect circle, from Robert's initial act of generosity, to her own dedication to medicine, to Andrew's sacrifice, and now to the recovery that united the three in an extraordinary story of mutual salvation. In the months that followed, as Robert continued his recovery, events took surprising turns. The Pharmatech case became one of the biggest corporate scandals in recent American history. Helen Thompson, in a collaboration agreement with Justice, revealed a corruption scheme that extended to other pharmaceutical companies and public officials. The experimental protocol developed by Emily and implemented in Robert's surgery attracted international attention. Invitations to conferences, offers of partnerships with renowned institutions, and funding proposals arrived daily. The little girl from the slum who had dreamed of becoming a doctor to help others was now at the forefront of a revolution in the treatment of liver diseases. On a sunny afternoon, 6 months after the surgery, Emily, Andrew, and Robert gathered in the latter's apartment for a private celebration. Robert, now completely recovered, had announced a significant decision. I'm completely restructuring my business, he explained, serving juice for the three. Alcohol was still out of the question for him. I've sold my stake in questionable companies and created a foundation dedicated to financing advanced treatments for low-income patients. That's wonderful, Robert, replied Emily, genuinely moved. And there's more, he continued with a gleam in his eye. I'd like you two to direct the scientific arm of the foundation. No bureaucracy, no commercial commitments, just pure research aimed at those who really need it. The proposal was perfect, exactly what Emily had promised in the hospital chapel on that desperate night. The opportunity to develop revolutionary treatments and make them accessible to all, fulfilling the cycle of generosity that Robert had initiated 18 years ago. It seems you always find ways to change my life for the better, she commented. Emotional? No, Em, Robert gently corrected. This time we're just following your example. It was your determination, your ethics, your courage that brought us here. Andrew, who had remained silent, finally spoke. We accept your proposal, Robert, but with one condition. Which is? Asked Robert, intrigued. That you give us a few weeks off first, replied Andrew, smiling. Then, turning to Emily, he took her hand and continued. Because I intend to ask Em to marry me, and I'd like to take her to meet my family in Vermont before we dive into a new project. The declaration surprised both Emily and Robert. She looked at Andrew, seeing all the love and respect that had grown between them during the months of shared struggle. You didn't even wait for my answer, she teased, although her eyes already said everything. I'm confident, he replied, smiling. After all, we faced a corrupt pharmaceutical corporation together. What could be more romantic than that? The three laughed, a sound of pure joy that celebrated not just the recovery and new beginnings, but the extraordinary journey that had united them. From the slum to the operating room, from near tragedy to renewed hope, the cycle of generosity had completed itself, only to initiate a new one, even broader. Robert raised his glass in a toast. To life, which surprises us in the most unexpected moments. To medicine, which connects us in our shared humanity. And to you two, who showed me that it's never too late to start anew. As the sun set over Boston, casting golden tones through the apartment window, Emily looked at the two men who had transformed her life, one who had given her the chance to